All right, so you want to know about float tanks, huh?
Yeah.
Well, get ready, because we're going deep on this one.
Deep dive time.
Yeah, we've got excerpts from The Book of Floating by Michael Hutchison, foreword, intro, and even some chapters. Pretty much the whole thing, actually.
Sounds like we're in for a float load of info.
Huh. Pun intended. But look, I know you're not just here for the basics. You want to know if those float tank benefits are legit, right?
Yeah. Is it all just hype? Or is there real science behind it?
Exactly. That's what this deep dive is all about. Getting past the hype and seeing what the science actually says.
It's funny, even the author, Michael Hutchison, started out as a skeptic.
Really?
Yeah, he couldn't believe people were actually paying to just lie in a dark box of water, especially in a world that's constantly bombarding us with stimulation.
Yeah, right. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Like
Oh,
we're all so plugged in these days.
all the time.
And you have this thing, sensory deprivation, that's like the complete opposite.
Total sensory reduction.
Right. But I guess the surge in popularity after Hutchison's article in the Village Voice proves something.
Yeah, people are definitely drawn to it for some reason.
It's like there's this hidden human need that we're all trying to fulfill.
Almost like a primal instinct. And it's not just a modern thing either.
Right. How so?
Think about when you were a kid. Did you ever play any games where you closed your eyes, to try and heighten your other senses?
Oh, yeah, totally.
I-
It's like that blind pirate, Blind Pew from Treasure Island. Super creepy.
Mm,
But he navigated by sound alone.
exactly. And Hutchison talks about how this drive for sensory restriction, it's actually woven through history and across cultures.
Like what? Shamans and stuff?
Yeah, shamans using trances, monks meditating in silence, even therapy in a way, that quiet space for introspection.
Makes sense.
It taps into that same need. Dr. Andrew Weil, a big name in integrative medicine, he even suggests that there's an evolutionary purpose to these altered states of awareness.
So it's not just some random thing. It's like wired into us.
Yeah, seems like it. And speaking of altered states, we can't talk about floating without mentioning the guy who brought us the modern float tank.
Oh, you mean Dr. John Lilly, right?
The dolphin whisperer himself.
I remember reading about his work. Wasn't he all about exploring consciousness in isolation?
That's the guy. He wanted to minimize external stimuli to study the brain and consciousness in their purest forms.
That's intense.
Oh, it was. He had people submerged in water in these crazy contraptions, but it was the precursor to the more user-friendly tanks we have today.
Thank goodness for that.
Mm.
And then came along Glenn Perry and the Samadhi tank.
Making floating accessible for the masses.
Right. I remember those popping up in spas and wellness centers everywhere. A lot more inviting than being stuck underwater, I'd say. But, I'm curious, did that movie, Altered States, have anything to do with the public perception of float tanks?
Oh, absolutely. That movie with William Hurt and all those trippy visuals
Yeah.
definitely added a layer of fear to the whole thing.
Yeah, I can see that. Curiosity mixed with fear. But you know what? Let's get down to the real deal here.
Let's dive into the science behind it all.
What does the book actually say about the effects of floating?
Well, Hutchison outlines its impact on 4 levels: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual.
Okay, 4 stories. I like that.
And he's super adamant that these aren't just some, subjective feelings like, oh, I felt relaxed. There's research to back it up.
Okay, so let's start with something we can all relate to, gravity. I mean, his weighing is down 204.7.
Literally, Hutchison actually calls it the anti-gravity explanation. Our bodies are fighting gravity all the time.
Makes sense.
And that leads to tension and stress. We don't even realize it half the time.
It's true, you don't really think about it until it's gone. You ever been in one of those zero gravity chambers?
I haven't, actually.
It's wild.
I bet.
But anyway, so floating gives us a break from that constant gravitational battle.
Exactly. Like hitting the reset button.
Mm-hmm.
It allows for deep relaxation and potential healing.
So our bodies can finally let go.
Yep. But it's not just the physical stuff. Floating also affects our brainwaves.
Brainwaves, you mean like alpha, beta, theta?
Yep, all of those. Each one reflects a different state of consciousness.
Right.
And the cool thing is floating seems to bump up the production of theta waves.
Now, theta waves, if I remember correctly, are linked to like creativity and insight.
Exactly. That dreamy state you get right before you fall asleep.
Right. So we're accessing that without actually falling asleep.
Pretty much. Usually it's tough to get there without nodding off. But floating seems to be a shortcut. It's kind of like what researchers have seen in experienced Zen monks during deep meditation.
Wow, that's fascinating. So we're tapping into monk-level brain activity. But isn't there another piece to this brainwave puzzle?
There is. Remember the two hemispheres of our brain?
Oh yeah, the classic left brain, right brain split.
Exactly. Logical versus creative. And let's be honest, our culture is pretty biased towards the left brain.
Totally. Always got to be logical and analytical.
Think outside the box, they say. But then, right? Like even the word implies you should think that way.
I never thought about it like that. But you're saying floating can help bridge that gap.
That's the idea. Floating promotes what's called hemispheric integration, a balance between the two sides.
So the best of both worlds, logic and intuition working together.
That's what we're aiming for. Hutchison actually tells this funny story about this guy named Billy the Painter.
Yeah, Billy the Bake.
Super laid-back dude, goes for a float, and afterwards he finds himself in this situation that needs quick action.
Oh no.
But the crazy thing is, it's like the float removed all his inhibitions. He just acts instinctively.
Wow.
Like pure, uninhibited action. No overthinking, just doing.
That's pretty amazing, like his right brain took over for a minute.
Maybe. And there's another brain model the book mentions, the triune brain.
Triune brain. We talking 3 brains here.
Basically, it's the idea that our brain has 3 parts. The reptilian brain, the paleomammalian brain, and the neocortex.
Whoa. Okay, I'm gonna need you to break this down for me.
No problem. So each part has its own function, and floating affects them all. We'll start with the reptilian brain, the most primal part.
Okay, the lizard brain.
It houses something called the reticular activating system, or RAS.
What's that do?
Basically, it regulates our awareness and arousal. And because of the sensory deprivation during floating, our RAS actually becomes more sensitive.
So we become more aware of, like, our internal world, our thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. It's like turning up the volume on those inner signals. Then there's a paleomammalian brain, our emotional center.
Feeling all the feels.
Right. And floating seems to reduce stress hormones while boosting the good stuff, like endorphins.
Endorphins are natural painkillers and mood boosters.
Yep. Less stress, more bliss.
Sign me up. But what about the neocortex? Isn't that like the most evolved part of our brain?
It is. And during floating, it gets a break from constantly processing all that external input.
Ah, a vacation for the neocortex.
Basically. And that allows it to focus more on what's happening internally.
So it's like becoming the mindful observer.
You got it. And it also gains more control over your limbic system, which is that emotional center we talked about.
So it's like a biofeedback loop. The thinking brain regulating our emotions.
That's a great way to put it. But there's one more thing I want to touch on before we move on. The idea of the body's own pharmacy.
Okay, tell me more about that. I'm intrigued.
Well, remember those endorphins?
Those happy little molecules.
Exactly. They're part of an amazing internal system. And research suggests that floating actually stimulates their release.
Hold on. So floating can lead to pain relief, euphoria.
Potentially even help break addictive patterns.
Whoa, that's pretty powerful stuff.
There's this classic experiment with rats. They get hooked on this lever that stimulates their pleasure centers. They'll forgo food and water just to keep hitting that lever.
Wow.
It shows how powerful those pleasure pathways in our brains are.
Right.
And floating might give us a way to consciously tap into that system and regulate it.
So it's like a form of, what, molecular self-improvement?
Something like that. But there's one more piece of the puzzle I want to explore with you. The link between mental imagery and physical responses.
That sounds a little,
Woo!
maybe it almost sounds like magic. Like just thinking about something can actually change your body.
It does sound wild, but there's science behind it. Edmund Jacobson, he was a pioneer in this field.
What do you do?
He showed that even just imagining a physical action, like lifting your arm, actually prepares your muscles for it.
Really?
Yeah. Our minds can influence our bodies in some pretty crazy ways.
Okay, so are you saying our thoughts can shape our physical reality?
Well, there are studies showing that visualization can lead to things like breast enlargement. And there are even cases of cancer remission linked to mental imagery.
No way. That's incredible.
Right. And the float tank, with all distractions minimized, it creates this perfect environment for focused visualization, like a blank canvas for your mind to work its magic.
And doesn't this tie into the idea of flow state? That feeling of being completely absorbed in an activity?
It absolutely does. Flow states are all about intense focus, losing track of time, that feeling of complete control.
So could floating actually induce a flow state?
Now that's the big question. There are arguments on both sides. Some say the lack of external stimuli could hinder flow,
Interesting.
while others think that deep focus and sense of control are perfect for it.
I had this experience that made me think about this. I was stuck in this packed subway car, total darkness,
Oh, no.
and I started to feel my anxiety rising.
Huh.
But then I remembered the feeling of floating,
Ah,
that sense of calm detachment,
yeah.
and it actually helped me stay relaxed.
See, floating can teach you valuable skills, but there's one more intriguing idea from the book that I want to bring up.
Okay, hit me.
The aquatic ape
The
hypothesis.
aquatic ape hypothesis. What in the world is that?
It's this theory suggesting our ancestors actually spent a lot of time in water, and that shaped our evolution.
Okay, I've never heard of this.
It's pretty wild. Think about it. We hold our breath, we have subcutaneous fat for buoyancy, even walking upright.
Walking upright.
Yeah, freeing up our hands.
I never thought of those traits in that context.
It's a controversial theory, but it makes you wonder why we find floating so appealing.
It does. I'm totally rethinking my whole evolutionary history now. But honestly, what's blowing my mind right now is the sheer variety of explanations.
Right. We've gone from gravity to brain waves to biochemistry to like ancient ape ancestors.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion, and each layer reveals a whole new understanding of floating.
And we haven't even gotten to the spiritual side of things yet.
Ooh, that's right. That's where Hutchison gets really personal, sharing his own journey towards enlightenment.
Through floating and meditation.
Well, I guess we'll have to save that for part 2. But one thing's clear. There's no single answer to how floating works.
It's a beautiful mystery.
Right. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Ta-
Okay, so we're back and ready to dive into that final chapter, the enlightenment explanation.
Should you see stuff?
Right, where Hutchison gets all deep and personal about his journey with floating and those no-mind experiences.
He takes us on quite the ride. Near-death experiences, a spinal injury, a long road to recovery. It's intense.
Wow, serious stuff. I imagine that kind of adversity really makes you confront, like, the big questions,
Absolutely. He was facing paralysis, bedridden, and in all this darkness, he delves into meditation and this idea of enlightenment, the kind spiritual masters talk about.
And that's where floating comes in.
Big time. He was already a dedicated floater, and he realized that those super relaxed states, those moments where his body dissolved and his mind went quiet,
Yeah.
those were glimpses of no mind, pure consciousness, no thoughts.
So he was like stumbling upon enlightenment in the tank.
You could say that, but he's careful to say it's not a guarantee. Hop in, boom, enlightenment. Not quite like that.
Right, it's not a magic bullet.
It's a possibility, something the tank can help with, especially combined with meditation, intentionally quieting the mind.
Okay, I get that. It takes effort. But what did those no-mind states actually feel like for him? Did you describe it?
He talks about it being total blankness, time disappears, there's just this primordial awareness, infinite emptiness, deep peace.
So not like falling asleep.
Nope, he was aware, just no thoughts, no images, no sense of time. And afterwards, this incredible sense of well-being.
Like an afterglow.
Totally. Exhilaration, renewed energy, it's powerful stuff.
Wow. It's like you reached the same state through 2 different paths, floating and meditation.
Exactly. And get this, he actually applied those no-mind techniques to his recovery process.
While he was bedridden.
Yeah, he'd practice quieting his mind. And he said it helped him manage the pain, overcome depression. He even regained mobility faster than the doctors expected.
They called him the Miracle Man.
Yeah.
Seriously, the Miracle Man.
Yeah.
It's amazing, right? The powers of mind-body connection. But there's another experience he talks about. This time it's spontaneous.
Oh, what happened?
He's being wheeled back to his room after a shower, and suddenly he's just overwhelmed with this radiance, pure bliss.
Whoa, so he wasn't even meditating or floating.
Just like that, out of nowhere. He says it's because of his ongoing practice with no mind.
So the more you experience it, the more it bleeds into your everyday life.
Seems that way. It's pretty mind-blowing, right?
Totally. It suggests that these states aren't just temporary, they can become part of who you are. But that whole thing about consciousness being all there is, that our reality is an illusion, I don't know. That's a bit hard to wrap my head around.
It's a huge shift in perspective. He uses this analogy of a movie being projected onto a screen.
Okay, I'm listening.
We get caught up in the story, the characters, but it's just light shining through film.
So the light is consciousness.
Yeah.
And we're the projections.
That's the idea. It's profound, liberating, but also kind of scary, maybe. Yeah, I can see that. But did he offer any, guidance for people who want to explore this stuff?
He did. He recommends several books by spiritual teachers who helped him. Eckhart Tolle, Ramana Maharshi.
A reading list.
Exactly. He's like, hey, if you're interested, check these out.
Nice. So he's basically saying floating itself isn't enlightenment. It's a tool,
Exactly.
a training ground for the mind, a place to quiet the mental chatter.
And then hopefully bring those skills back into everyday life.
Exactly. Even if you're not searching for enlightenment, there's still a lot to learn here.
I agree. It shows how connected our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being really is, and the power of intention.
It makes you wonder, if floating can offer a glimpse of those profound experiences, what else could we discover in that silent space?
That's the beauty of it. It's an invitation to explore, to dive deeper into who we are.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the history of floating to its potential for healing, growth, even transformation.
It's been quite the journey.
From gravity and brainwaves to endorphins and enlightenment.
We've explored a whole range of explanations for how floating does its thing.
And what's clear is there's no one answer.
No, it's this amazing synergy of factors.
That's what makes it so powerful.
Totally. But before we move on, there's something else I wanted to get into. The book mentions these other benefits of floating.
Oh yeah, like what?
Boosting athletic performance, overcoming addictions. It's pretty wild.
Floating can help with all that.
It seems so. It shows just how versatile floating is, how many different areas of life it can touch.
So we're talking enhancing creativity, improving focus, reducing stress, managing pain.
And potentially breaking free from those habits and addictions that hold us back.
Floating as a tool for personal growth and transformation. That's a powerful concept.
It is, and it brings us right back to the heart of this deep dive. Floating is more than just relaxation. It's something that can profoundly impact our physical, mental, and even spiritual well-being.
All right. Let's talk about this whole floating for breaking bad habits thing. It sounds almost too good to be true. Is the book really saying you can quit smoking or lose weight just by floating?
It is. And the key is, it's not just about willpower, it's about how floating changes our brain chemistry and those deep-seated beliefs that drive our habits.
So it's deeper than just deciding, okay, I'm going to quit. Like something more is happening on a subconscious level.
Exactly. Hutchison talks about Dr. Peter Sudfeld, the sensory deprivation researcher. He found that floating, what he calls restricted environmental stimulation therapy, can unfreeze those ingrained habits and attitudes.
Unfreeze. Okay, I'm not sure I get that.
Think of it like this. Our habits, especially addictions, they're like frozen patterns in our brain.
Okay.
Super resistant to change. But floating, by cutting out all that external stuff and getting you super relaxed, it thaws those patterns, makes them more flexible.
So it's like hitting the reset button on those neural pathways.
Exactly. And get this, Sudfeld found that if you combine floating with targeted messages, like playing them through underwater speakers while you're in the tank,
Whoa.
it can really boost the effect.
So you're floating, super chill, and hearing messages about quitting smoking or making healthier choices.
Pretty powerful stuff, right?
Yeah, that sounds really effective.
Sudfeld's research showed impressive results with smoking cessation using this method. And there's some research on weight loss, too, people losing a lot of weight relatively quickly.
Wow. It's like it helps you sidestep those conscious resistances and reprogram your subconscious.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just external messages. Hutchison talks about using floating for self-analysis, too.
Like figuring out the root causes of those bad habits. Why we reach for that cigarette or that extra slice of cake in the first place.
Exactly. He says that theta brainwave state, the one floating naturally brings on, it's perfect for this kind of deep dive into yourself.
Like accessing a hidden part of your mind.
Yeah, a place where you can tap into those memories and subconscious patterns that are driving those habits.
This reminds me of how people describe floating as a tool for boosting creativity, for problem solving.
It's true.
Like you're tapping into a different part of your brain, one that's not so bound by logic.
Great connection. And just like with creativity, Hutchison says floating for habit change, it takes an open mind, a willingness to let go.
Surrender to the float, you could say?
To let those insights come up organically from that deeper awareness.
So it's not about forcing change, it's about creating the right conditions for it to happen naturally.
Exactly. He also stresses that it takes patience, persistence. Breaking deep-seated habits, it's not a quick fix, even with floating.
Okay, so not a magic bullet, but a powerful tool for personal growth.
I'd say so. And Hutchison gives some specific tips for using flowing this way. He says focus on body awareness.
Like becoming more aware of the physical sensations, the consequences of your habits.
Yeah, like feeling that tightness in your chest from smoking or that uncomfortable fullness from overeating.
Interesting.
And then he suggests using visualization, picturing yourself making those healthier choices, really feeling the positive emotions that come with it.
Like creating a mental blueprint for the change you want.
Exactly. Retraining your mind and body to crave those healthier options.
It all comes back to that mind-body connection, right?
Hmm.
Which we've been talking about a lot. Floating seems to bridge that gap, helps you work with both sides at the same time.
I like that. It's not just about changing your thoughts or your behavior. It's about getting them both on the same page.
Working in harmony. Well, we've really dug deep into floating here, haven't we? From its surprising popularity to its potential for healing and growth, even transformation.
It's been an amazing journey. We went from gravity and brainwaves to endorphins and enlightenment.
So many different ways to understand how floating works.
Right. And the thing is, it's not just one thing. It's the synergy of factors that makes it so powerful.
It affects us on so many levels, our physical bodies, our subconscious minds, even our whole perception of reality.
It really is remarkable.
So what do you say? Ready to give floating a try?
I hope we've inspired you to at least consider it. It's something you have to experience to fully understand.
Who knows what you might discover?
The possibilities are endless. Until next time.